The millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And have we got a great show? We're going to be talking about Texas politics. We're going to be talking about the economy and social justice. So it's a jam-packed show with a number of experts, and I think we'll learn a lot of information. We're going to start out this program with former Texas Senator Konni Burton. Connie, are you with us?
I'm here, Merrill. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Well, just to give our listeners some of the background here, Connie and I go back several years. She attended fairly regularly a monthly conservative lunch I sponsor in Dallas. And after attending for a while, she made the announcement that she was going to challenge then Texas Senator Wendy Davis to her seat. And we thought, okay, Wendy's fairly popular in the area. It's going to be a challenge, but good luck. And then lo and behold, not long after that, Wendy Davis decided she was going to run for governor, and we thought, oh my, it opened up, and it really just paved the way for Konni Burton to become a state senator in Texas. Now, in Texas, state senators last for 4 years as opposed to 6 years like the U.S. Senate. So Connie took over that position, became, in my opinion, one of the best, most conservative, most principled state senators, along with Senator Don Huffines. If you had Connie on and you mentioned an issue, this is a person who hadn't been doing this for 2 decades. She was a lifelong Republican, but this was her first time in office. You'd point to an issue, and she just took off with information, statistics, facts, things that were going on, what was happening, and where she wanted to go, and it was amazing. And I think most of us thought you were just going to do fairly well in this last election, and it came up, and we were all surprised that you did not win that election. Tell us a little bit about what happened there.
Sure, yes. As many know, or maybe they don't, we had a pretty rough midterm election here in Texas this last election cycle. And now, first and foremost, and I would try to remind everybody when I was on the campaign trail is, any midterm election, regardless of which party is in power, so to speak, I always hate to use that term with government, but nonetheless, whoever is in power at the national level, generally it's bad election cycle for them in the midterms. So first and foremost, we had that going against us.
Right.
We knew it was going to be tough. And then secondly, and probably more importantly, is Senate District 10, which is within Tarrant County, not all of Tarrant County, it's just a portion of Tarrant County, is the only swing Senate seat in the state of Texas. So every other state Senate seat in the state of Texas is either safe Republican or safe Democrat. Senator Don Huffines is the second one, I believe, which is the closest one. And so whenever both parties are always very much going after this Senate District 10 seat, because each party at any election cycle can take that seat. Now, I will have to tell you, we had, like you mentioned, we had everything going for us this election cycle. We had everybody from grassroots conservatives to moderate Republicans to establishment Republicans to even lobby organizations down in Austin. Everybody was behind us. Everybody expected us to win, which is sometimes a problem, right? We all know you don't want people to get complacent.
Right.
And so you're always worried about that because while it's a good feeling to have that everybody believes you're going to win, at the same time, you've got to keep people energized and focused and coming out and voting.
And, from my standpoint, I the few times I talked to you during the campaign, I didn't get the sense that you were sort of sitting back and saying, I've got this. You looked like you were out on the hustings and working the crowd and trying to ensure that you were going to get reelected.
Absolutely. We were running and gunning. We knocked on 130,000 doors in Senate District 10. Governor Abbott brought in a group that knocked on 50,000 doors. The numbers are staggering. We dropped 550,000 pieces of mail in Senate District 10. We spent $2.5 to $3 million on this campaign. Now, that does include the primary. We were up on not only cable TV, but also, regular TV as well, network TV as well. We outperformed our opponent 2-1 on any of our fundraising reports. She didn't have the financial resources we did. She didn't have the ground game to speak of. Her mail universe was fairly small, whereas ours was a much larger universe that we were getting mail to. Their campaign even struggled to get up on cable, they didn't get up on network TV. So all of those numbers, everybody's probably saying, well, what the heck happened, right? Because we were acting like we were 10 points behind the whole time. We knew we had, the midterm election we had to fight. We also knew that we were in a very close district. What we didn't know, and it didn't sound like we didn't begin the work against this as we saw it unfold. But what we didn't know ahead of the election was that we were going to have a little-known congressman from El Paso, Texas, kind of be knighted by the Democrats and the media as, the next. The next best thing since sliced bread, right?
Yes. By
the name of Beto, right?
Or Robert Francis.
That is correct. Robert Francis, exactly. So, so it's twofold. So I want everybody to understand, first and foremost, President Trump is definitely energized and engaged Democrats like never before. Mm-hmm. We all see it. They despise the man with a red-hot passion. So that has really energized them. So that's the first thing that happened. Then Robert Francis O'Rourke walks in. The media thinks he's a darling. He gets coverage anywhere he goes, everywhere he goes. And he raised $80 million.
A record.
And spent, yes, it's a record, and spent $80 million in the state of Texas. When you have a candidate who has $80 million and spends that throughout the state, that's tough, right? And we all saw by the results of Senator Cruz, by the very slim margin he won by, that kind of money and campaign and media attention is really, really what hurts down ballot races. Generally, most people probably know that, a lot of times down ballot races try to hang on to the coattails of those that are top of the ticket. And in our particular race, we actually outperformed Senator Cruz. He lost Senate District 10 by 7.5 points. We lost it by 3.5 points.
That's amazing.
Unheard of.
When we come back, I want you to tell us if there's some. Explain that you think you could have done something different. If you want to know more about Konni Burton to our listeners, her information is up on our website, pointofview.net, and we will be back with her in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The millennial generation has a much more positive view of socialism than the previous generation. One survey found that a majority of those aged 18 to 29 had positive feelings about socialism compared to capitalism. There are a number of reasons for their perspective. First, their teachers and textbooks teach about the evils of capitalism. And if that is not enough, the popular media reinforce those ideas. Think of all the movies and TV programs where a capitalist is evil or the greedy corporation is hurting everyone in society. Second, young people want equality. The naive view of socialism seems to provide fairness, equality, and a level playing field. Millennials who feel that life is unfair gravitate to socialism because it seems to provide help for those hurt in a free market society. Third, they haven't done the math. It's easy to argue for free college tuition when you aren't paying for it. It's easy to let the government pay for everything until you realize you are the government. One article that appeared in the Washington Post had this headline: Millennials like socialism until they get jobs. Here are two suggestions about how to get the younger generation to rethink their ideas about socialism. First, millennials don't like other people telling them what to do. In a socialist economy, the leaders are constantly telling you and the economy what to do. Second, a small group of bureaucrats are making most of those economic decisions. Ask them if they've ever tried to get anything done with a committee. Now expand that to the millions of economic decisions that a committee of bureaucrats need to make. History, logic, and personal experience illustrate why socialism doesn't work and is harmful to people in general and the society at large. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From 20th Century Fox and Franklin Entertainment, Breakthrough, starring Chrissy Metz, based on a true story. Breakthrough, rated PG, in theaters Wednesday, April 17th. Point of View, Truth Team 360.
Hi, this is Lee Strobel, author of The Case for Christ. You know, one of the best ways that we can grow in our ability to understand why we believe what we believe is to get an ongoing dose of God's truth into our lives. And one of the best ways of all to do that, Kirby Anderson does a tremendous job of giving us a regular diet of evidence, of logic, of God's truth from His Word, so that we can continue to do what 1 Peter 3:15 tells us, to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks us to give the reason for the hope that we have, and to do it gently and with respect. So I am a huge fan of Kirby. I'm a huge fan of Point of View. I know that you probably are as well. That's why you're listening, and I hope you'll get behind them, support them, so that this ministry can continue on into the future and flourish even more next year than this year.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
And we're back. Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And on the phone with me today is former Texas State Senator Konni Burton, and we're talking about the electoral upheaval from last November. So, Konni, you seem to do everything right in this past election and still lost. Is there anything in retrospect you would have done differently, you think?
Absolutely not, and that's the good news. There is no regrets on how we ran our campaign, what we did with the dollars that people trusted in us, how we, what we purchased with their hard-earned money to run our campaign. There's absolutely nothing we would have done differently. We had a fabulous, wonderful campaign manager. We had 27 staffers, young, energetic, conservative staffers. We were everywhere we needed to be. Again, this was an election about Beto, right? So what he did with that money is he brought in voters that we hadn't seen before. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we could have gotten to these voters. We didn't know who they were. These were new voters that he brought in, just like, as a matter of fact, Trump did in his presidential election, right? That was what was kind of blindsided the Democrats on the during the presidential election, because Trump just brought in new voters that people weren't aware was going to come out and vote. And basically that's what happened in this past election. Beto brought in voters that were new. He increased the young, also minority vote. As well as, I might mention that, there is some constituency that we're losing a little bit in the Republican Party because of Trump as well. So, when you're working this hard against outside sources, it's very hard. And I wouldn't do anything differently. But I would like to mention, if I have a minute, Merrill, about what happened with media there in North Texas. It's kind of interesting, and I think people need to know this, because it's one thing that was kind of done to us that I don't regret it. It's just, it's frustrating, and we all on our side of the aisle get it all the time. And I kind of want to get this information more out there. But Beverly Powell didn't pay her own state, county, and school board property taxes.
And she was your competitor.
Yes, she was my opponent. And so she had judgments against her. As a matter of fact, she had some at the state level as well. She has a long history of not paying her taxes. And this information was known by the Star-Telegram, not only the Star-Telegram, but also the Dallas Morning News. And as a matter of fact, on the Dallas Morning News, when they go to the endorsement form that you fill out, she actually wrote on there that she did not have any judgments against her, which is not true. She did. We have the proof. They had the proof. And yet, neither one of these media outlets ran with this story at all. Now, I'm not saying this is why we didn't win at all, but it just drives the point home, what we all know, that it's very aggravating that, we have to not only run against Democrats, but we've got to run against the media that carries their water. Because I'll tell you darn sure, that the Dallas Morning News and the Star-Telegram, had it been me who had a history of not paying property taxes, that story would have been out there ad nauseum. Right? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it is interesting that we oftentimes see Democrats pushing for tax increases, saying we need to do that. But most of the time when we find stories of people who are not paying their taxes, it ends up being Democrats.
That's exactly correct. And here's the deal, and this is why it's relevant. Because now she is down here making policy on the number one issue in Senate District 10, which is the rising cost of property taxes. Mm-hmm. So and as a matter of fact, will not be supporting property tax, to get control of these property taxes for taxpayers. And yet she's one that didn't pay her own property taxes. So there's a relevance here, right?
Conflict of interest, maybe.
Right.
I want to get to the issue of property taxes in a second, but let me ask you this question. We've been hearing for years, and maybe hearing's not the right word, maybe seeing the hope from both Democrats and the media that Texas would eventually turn blue. We did see something of a blue wave in the November election, especially in the down ballot. A lot of judges changed over and so forth. Do you see this as something that's temporary, or do you think this is something that is highlighting a permanent change in Texas?
Right. So I don't know that it's going to be a permanent change, but because you never know what's going to be down the road. But right now, it is as close as it's ever been on the possibility of Texas turning blue, because this election, with this amount of money that was put into it, like you mentioned, Harris County lost 59 Republican judges. Not to mention, I lost my seat, or the Senate District 10 seat. Senator Don Huffines lost his. We've got a lot of House members, of course, in the Dallas County area that lost. So what this has done is it has, again, as I mentioned earlier, energized Democrats. It's like, oh, wait, something is happening. In other words, it's not just another, oh, yeah, everybody's saying, there's a blue wave when there's really not. Now people see, so to speak, blood in the water. and they are energized. They're forming. We've already, in Tarrant County, they are already block walking. They are setting their sights against House members in Tarrant County. Let's see, Krause and Stickland and Tinderholt and Zedler are all targeted by the Democrats in Tarrant County alone. And again, that's because it's like, oh my goodness, we might be able to do this. And so energy is a big deal in campaigns. We know this. We've seen it in the presidential with President Trump and when this past election with Robert Francis O'Rourke. So whoever has the energy has the momentum, and it could possibly turn in their favor. So while I don't know at this point that it's going to be permanent, we better get energized on our side of the aisle to make sure it doesn't become that.
You know, as you pointed out earlier, when you're going into that midterm election, especially the midterm election after a new president comes in, just historically, you've got an uphill battle if you're the party in power. We saw that in 2010. Barack Obama was elected in 2008, 2010. Republicans take over the House and begin to take a major expansion in what they were doing. You had that pushback there. So there was that sort of there's that historical anomaly, but right. You're right that when Democrats see that, they, I think, are going to start trying to push that message because they think we finally have a chance to be able to do it. But that advantage that they have in the midterm tends to fall apart in the next election cycle, and that's going to be the presidential election in 2020. And we'll see. I noticed here recently, I think it was Larry Sabato, the political scientist, in his prediction said if the election was taken right now, Trump would win by a landslide. I thought that was very interesting because you sort of don't hear that in the media, but that was his take on it at the situation right now. A lot can change between now and then, but it was interesting that was his take.
That is interesting, and that's kind of where I am right now when I'm talking to people, because I'm going around, the state talking about what happened in the election and what we need to do. And what I don't know is because, as I mentioned, Beto brought in a whole electorate of people that we didn't know were going to come out and vote. Mm-hmm. Well, again, Trump did the same thing. So while I think that these Beto voters will come out again because, one, he's trying to run for president. Let's say, he doesn't even get the presidential nomination. If he gets a vice presidential nomination, there's that. Or even if he doesn't get either one of those, he's still going to be working very hard for whoever the Democrat ticket is, right? He's going to be working Texas very hard. So likely he's going to continue to bring out those voters for 2020. Well, Trump has got this electorate that he brought out as well.
Hold it there, Connie. When we come back, I want to see what you think about the legislature so far. 1-800-351-1212 if you want to talk to Konni Burton, and we'll be back.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
1-800-351-1212. If you want to talk to former State Senator Konni Burton, 1-800-351-1212. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. Konni, before we left for the break, you were talking about the problem with the media here in Texas and not being especially fair to everyone. I think you may be planning on trying to address that issue.
Yes, and I'm gonna be a little cheekish here, if I may, and say that I have something that I'm working on right now. That's the best way to put it. And I'm not going to go much further than that. I'm glad that you brought that up. I am working on a project, and in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be announcing it and putting a teaser video out very soon. And
Good.
So I hope everybody pays attention. I'm glad you mentioned my, I've got a Facebook page and Twitter account and Instagram, and I hope people will go and like or friend or whatever you do on these and all these different social medias and pay attention, because I think everybody will be very interested in what I'm about to do. So thank you for letting me tease that a little bit.
How do people get on your mailing list or find you on email or a website or whatever?
Right. Yeah, so my website is Konni Burton TX. So they can go at Konni Burton TX. KonniBurton.com. Excuse me. It's KonniBurton.com for my website. The Facebook is Konni Burton TX. So you can definitely go to the website, KonniBurton.com, and you can put your information in there, and we will, you will be getting our little teaser as well as the full information when we launch. If you get on our email list. And then, of course, we'll be putting it out via Twitter and on Facebook and Instagram as well. So I think most people are going to be interested and excited, and I know I sure am. So it's something that's desperately needed here in the state of Texas.
And we have that contact information up on the Point of View website, pointofview.net. Now, tell me, what do you think about the legislature? I mean, given how contentious things were 2 years ago, they seem, specifically, I mean, they just seem mild by comparison. What's your take on what's happening in Austin right now?
Yeah, listen, I saw somebody tweet the other day something about never seen this kind of. Oh, what was the word?
Camaraderie?
Yes.
Group hugs?
Like that. Right. Functional. That's it. It popped into my head. It's such a functional house. And I thought, wait, what? It's ridiculous. We've got 151 House members in that chamber. These are people who come from very disparate districts, right? I mean, of course, there is absolutely and utterly nothing wrong with contention on the House floor. As a matter of fact, I know at least conservative activists love to watch the House floor. They stream the House floor because they like to see the arguments and things. Now, obviously there's always, people can actually cross a line at times, and that happens. And we don't want that. But that is what government is about, is respectfully arguing ideas and having some contention and those kinds of things. So I have never been one to say, oh, look, the school board all voted, however many there are, 11-0 on every vote for every, meeting. I mean, to me, that's not healthy for a republic, frankly.
That sounds
right?
like Russia and North Korea.
Exactly. So that's, people need to be very careful if they think that's a good thing, because what I see more is everybody is being controlled by someone, and I'm not talking about anything specific here. I'm just talking about government in general, right? That's what it looks like to me. And we have got a great system in place so that we can argue and, go back and forth and then respectfully talk to each other afterwards, because that's the process. So I'm not one of these that are out there going, oh, look, it's functional now because they've got votes that are, unanimous. That's strange, and I don't like it, frankly. Yeah. So that's where I stand on that.
1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to talk to Senator Konni Burton. 1-800-351-1212. Okay, now I've got to ask you. The governor had put on property tax reform as a key issue he wanted to address, and so everybody seemed to be good with that. We were going to lower property taxes, and that seemed like a great thing. And then yesterday it came out where apparently Governor Abbott, Dan Patrick, and the Speaker all on board with a sales tax increase. All of a sudden you're putting money back in one pocket and taking it out of the other. I'm not sure what to think about that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm where you are with that. And the only reason I have a little bit of caution in my voice is because I've been there, right, for 2 sessions, and I see how things kind of evolve at a very rapid pace toward the end of session, and that's kind of where we are. And I know there's lots and lots of things going on behind the scenes. So while I'm very, very concerned and frankly very worried, because we have so many people in the state of Texas, not to mention in Senate District 10 that we heard from constantly for years that need property tax relief. I hear them, we hear them, but I want everybody to be just a teeny tiny bit patient, but don't be so patient that you're not calling your representative and your senator to let them know, please, I need property tax relief. And that we need to go with the original SB2. That's, we need that 2.5. We need the electorate to be able to vote on whether your local governments go above that rate. Right now they're calling this a tax swap, between the sales tax and a property tax. Well, listen, I've always beat the drumbeat for a consumption tax. Let's get rid of the property tax and go to straight consumption tax. But what I say is we do it all in one fell swoop. You can't do this, okay, let's raise the property tax here to buy down over there, because you've still got that property tax issue. And so what us taxpayers are concerned with is, oh, yeah, that sounds good for a little tiny short period of time, but what happens down the road when our property taxes go back to increasing, and now we've got this penny sales tax increase, right?
Right.
So that's the way taxpayers look at it. We're all very, leery, tired of being told one thing only to have increasing taxes down the road. And so, we need to be just a tiny bit patient, but continue to call your representative and your senator and say, listen, I need property tax relief. If we're going to go to a consumption tax, we'll go to that and get rid of the property tax. But let's not, play with numbers. We see what's going on here. We need permanent relief, now and down the road.
Well, I noticed Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform, was not patient at all. He immediately came out with a statement saying that was not a good trade-off to decrease property taxes and then raise the sales tax. And it strikes me that at least right now, I don't know what that trade-off is. Does that mean by raising the sales tax by 1 penny, I think is what they're proposing, is it still overall a tax cut? I believe Grover thought that was not going to be a tax cut. Have you looked at any numbers on that?
I haven't, dived deep into that. It's supposed to be that penny increase is supposed to decrease the property taxes, but the way from my just 30,000 foot level, it doesn't look like a tax decrease to me. And so again, I don't want to speak too specifically because I haven't read into it too much. And if we continue to keep pressure on them, we can move this in the right direction, right? So, and I don't mean, to be patient in that people don't speak up and have their voice heard. I just mean we're not at the end yet, right? And so now's the time to make sure you're connecting with your representatives because, I don't think this is the direction we need to be going because we're not talking about a complete one or the other. And what my concern is long term, will it actually be a tax increase, right? So we need to be engaged. We need to be talking to them. We need to let them know. We do not want to go in this direction without in this direction, what we need is permanent property tax relief.
Yeah, I found it very interesting how they came up in just, I thought we were looking at property tax cuts, and all of a sudden we're looking at a sales tax increase there that I was not aware we were thinking about doing. 1-800-351-1212 if you want to talk to Senator Konni Burton, one of the best senators that we had in Texas, out for right now. Maybe she'll come back sometime soon, I'm hoping. 1-800-351-1212, and we'll be back in our final segment in just a minute.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
I'm actually on my way to work, and I listen to you guys' program every day on the way to work. It just gives me a lot to think about.
Thank you. First of all, let me say I listen to y'all's show every day as much as I'm able, and I really appreciate the topics and conversation that y'all bring to the fore.
I always wanted to give because I thought that Point of View really brings a lot of things out here in the open that you don't hear anywhere else.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
And we're back. Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And on the line with me, former State Senator Konni Burton. And we're talking about the issues in Texas. Konni, one of the things that you were most focused on in your time there was trying to take that connection out from groups that receive tax money and stop them from lobbying for more tax money. Talk a little bit about that issue and where it stands right now.
Perfect. Thank you for bringing that up. It's near and dear to my heart.
Yes, it was.
That I found out about. It's something that I found out about as a regular taxpayer, and it incensed me. And so it was something I worked on for 2 sessions. And then, the more when I go around and talk about it, people are just, incensed as well. So just to explain it, we have taxpaying entities, local levels of government that hire lobbyists to go to Austin to lobby on the government's behalf. In other words, they're going down on behalf of the taxing entity, not for the taxpayers, but the taxing entity. And so, while local level governments certainly don't want a reduction in what they can charge for their rates for property taxes, so they have lobbyists who come here to say, no, we need to be able to increase property taxes because, we have these costs, yada, yada, yada kind of thing. Well, these lobbyists are paid by the taxpayer dollars. So we have poor homeowners who are in Senate District 10 who are frustrated, calling, our office for 2 sessions saying we need to lower property taxes. And so they're paying these property taxes to, say, schools, counties, cities, who are then hiring lobbyists to come down to say, no, we need to keep property taxes, up. So their own money is being used against them down in Austin. I just can't believe it. It still stuns me when I talk about it. We had bipartisan support for it because once you explain it to these legislators, because it's something that's morphed over time, as everything does in government, and you don't even realize it's happening. And so once I would explain it to legislators what's going on, I was getting bipartisan support. Now, we couldn't get it out of the Senate, which is unbelievable. And then we even had just a reporting bill so that we would force these local taxing entities to at least put it on, as a line item so that people can see where their money is going. Couldn't even get that out. But because we raised such awareness on it, which is what I'm so proud of, we've got Representative Mays Middleton and State Senator Bob Hall who are carrying those bills right now. And I have to tell you right now, I'm not sure. I think the House bill has gotten out of committee, I believe. I'm not sure where Senator Bob Hall's is. So I will give, just in case anybody's wondering and listening, the House bill is 281, House Bill 281 by Mays Middleton, and the Senate bill is Senate Bill 29 by State Senator Bob Hall. Anybody can go on to Texas Ledge online and put those bill numbers in, and you can find out where they are in the process. And please call your state senator, your House member, and tell them to get these pushed through the system because we need this legislation passed and into law.
And mention some of the organizations that we're talking about here. I think the Municipal League and a few others. Is that correct?
Yeah, Texas Municipal League is a big one that fights it every year. And this, again, is my understanding that Texas Municipal League, once upon a time, was just an information, organization for local taxing entities. They would just say, okay, this legislation will affect you, city, county, or school district in this way so that you know, right? So that's what it was. Well, then it slowly over time morphed into, hey, we'll lobby if you'll give us money. We'll actually go down there and lobby in your support. And again, they're generally on the side of the taxing entity, not the taxpayer. So, again, Texas Municipal League is the worst. I mean, they will, put out information that, why we need to continue to keep this in place, and, these tax dollars are needed for this and that. Well, we all know we all need our own tax dollars as well, right? This is our income that, we're paying into taxes. And people who come down here that want lower property taxes are using their own dime, their own money, their own gas, their own cars to come down here and say, please lower my property taxes, while their tax dollars are also paying for lobbyists who are fighting against them. So it's an insane system, and it needs to stop. We need to stop this taxpayer-funded lobbying.
In our last couple of minutes, give us a sense. Are you optimistic about where the legislature is going this year? Do you think we'll come out and say, well, they did a pretty good job, or are we really left a lot of things on the table?
Right now, my worry is that we've left way too many things on the table. I'm very concerned and very worried. Having said that, I do know that the last week, this last month, things are going to be flying fast and furiously, and there is time to get things done. And so I want everybody to be very, again, vigilant, on calling their rep and senator and encouraging them. We need encouragement now. They need your help. They need your backing. They need you to tell them, they need to hear from you what you want done down there, because it can happen. But I'm worried. If we don't speak up, we may not have a session that we're proud of. And listen, at the end of the day, what we need to be proud of is what they're doing to defend Texans' liberties and pocketbooks and that kind of thing. But also, if we don't have the base for Republicans in the 2020 election, it's not going to be pretty. Regardless of how Trump does elsewhere in the country, if you've got a base in Texas that's not pleased with what happened in the election, in the session, it's going to be a pretty rough election cycle. So not only do the legislators need to do the right thing for Texans and for their constituents, we got to do this so that we can keep the base energized, because you've got to do what you told us you were going to do. You've got to come through and do the things that you campaigned on, or you're not going to have people who are going to go out and block walk for you or give you money for your campaigns. It's just how it works. So, we need them to come through. We've got time. We just need them to come through and get it done.
It's an interesting point, because I deal mostly with the federal legislature, but we do hear from staffers at times saying the congressman, the senator wants to do this, but it's getting a lot of pushback. He or she needs support for this effort that they're trying to make, and they need people to be able to speak up so that they have, for lack of a better term, a little cover for what they're trying to do. Well, Konni Burton, thank you so much for joining us. It's been very informative, and we're looking forward to that new information. We'll be hearing from you in the next couple of weeks.
Yep.
For our listeners, you can go to pointofview.net and get that contact information for her. Thank you so much, Konni.
You bet. Thank you, buddy. It's been an honor to be on with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to come back and talk about economics in just a minute with the once and future worker, author Oren Cass from the Manhattan Institute. He's got some interesting new takes on economics. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team. or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to the show. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And I am excited about our new guest here today because he has sort of shaken up the economic discussion. My guest is Oren Cass. He is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research. That's based in New York. Oren's been working in the policy area for a while. He was involved in both of Mitt Romney's presidential campaigns, domestic policy director, graduate of Williams College and Harvard Law School, and he also worked as a management consultant and in the with Bain and Company. That was again a Mitt Romney organization, and he is a former editor of the Harvard Law Review, and he has recently published a book, The Once and Future Worker, and he raises a number of questions about economics that sort of raises questions about the current paradigm. Oren, thank you for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I've been friends with the Manhattan Institute for a number of years. I haven't been there for a while, but have in years past been at some of the events that they hosted there in New York City. It's a great organization, a sort of conservative-leaning organization, free market organization, I should say, and it just does some great work with a number of scholars there. And we thank you for joining us. So let's get onto your book now. I think your book came out last year, did it not?
Yes, right at the end of the year.
Right, and it's been out for a little while. There's been a lot of discussion about this because we're entering another presidential election cycle. There's going to be a lot of discussion about the economy. Going back to James Carville, it's the economy, stupid. The conservatives are going to say, look, the economy is doing well, growth is happening, the economy is moving forward. Democrats are going to criticize what's happening in the economy, saying we need to redistribute more money, we need to help people out there who can't find a job. You take a little bit of a different take on the decades-old paradigm that economists have been considering for the economy. So why don't we start out with you sort of just giving your basic thesis here?
Sure. You know, as you just alluded to, the way that economists and really policy folks, you know, left of center, right of center, Democrat, Republican, the way everyone has talked about the economy for a very long time is with this metaphor of the economic pie. If you know, presidents going all the way back to Harry Truman have liked to use it. New York Times and Wall Street Journal both like to use it. And the idea is that sort of the total amount of stuff we have in the economy is kind of like a pie, and everybody gets a slice of it. And the bigger everybody's slice is, the better. And so that's why we hear so much about growing the pie. So how do we make the overall size of the economy bigger, and how do we give everyone a bigger slice? And so what our politicians have been fighting about typically is, okay, well, what's the right set of policies to grow the pie, to get economic growth? And then what's the right set of policies to redivide it? How much redistribution should we do, essentially moving pie from some people's plates to others? And I think the important thing to emphasize is that on its own terms, this has worked. I mean, over the last 40 years, 50 years, we've experienced extraordinary economic growth. We've experienced an extraordinary increase in the amount of redistribution we do. And as a result, everyone really does have more pie. Everybody's standard of living in terms of how much they can consume really has gone way, way up, even at the very bottom. And yet, people aren't happy with the situation. We have a lot of very serious problems that seem to be getting a lot worse. And my goal was to kind of try to make sense of that and say, what have we gotten wrong?
Well, one of the things that economists have sort of agreed on for the past 3 or 4 decades, I guess since World War II, was that the central focus of the economy should be the consumer. Are we doing what the consumer wants? And you try to bring back in the worker into that discussion in a way that hasn't been there for a little while. What's the role of the worker, and what do you see has been lacking?
That's exactly right. I mean, it's in a sense, it's a funny thing to say. Should we talk about consumers or workers? They're the same people, right? All of us, we're all consumers and we're all workers too. And each household both tries to work and earn money and then consume stuff. And so the funny thing is, we're not talking about different people. We're talking about kind of different sides of everybody. And exactly as you said, the standard model in economics is that the goal is consumer welfare. Everyone wants to consume as much as possible. And in fact, work is considered a bad thing. I mean, part of the goal is how can you consume as much as possible while doing as little work as possible is kind of the way economics is set up, as that's what it assumes everybody wants. And that's what gets this idea of everybody wants a big piece of pie on their plate. And my argument is that, consumption is good. It's nice to have higher living standards, but it really misses a lot of what's so important to people. And especially it misses a lot of what's so important to the health of our families and our communities, and even ultimately our economy. People's role as workers, as productive contributors to the economy is incredibly important. And so to take the metaphor too far, we kind of have to ask who's baking the pie. And if the way you're growing the pie and putting more on people's plate actually leaves a lot of people out and says, you might have to sit on the sidelines and then be happy with what we give you, that's not going to be an effective model. And I think what we're seeing happen in this country is an ever larger share of the population sidelined in that way so that they're not in a position to support themselves and their own families with their own work. And that's causing a lot of the breakdowns that we then see in families, in communities, and in a sense now in our whole country.
One of the things, this program doesn't have a lot of good things to say about Karl Marx, but one of the things I picked up from him when I read Das Kapital many years ago is that he sees work and the worker as sort of integral. Who I am and what I do, he sees those so intertwined that that the work and who I am sort of merge in a sense of when people say, who are you? And then the next thing they ask is, what do you do? It's those two things sort of run together. And as I recall, he sort of highlighted that. And we've sort of pulled away a little bit from that, at least in our public policy. We've got about a minute left. Can you at least touch on that issue?
Yeah, that's well put. I've been accused of being a conservative Marxist, and hey, maybe that's the sweet spot. Because as you said, it's not just the philosophy; it's also the social science tells us that it's incredibly important to people's self-esteem, to their mental health, to their life satisfaction, to the relationships they form. It's really important for kids just growing up in families where the adults are working, and in all of these different ways. Work really matters. And so as we think about good public policy, we can't just say, let's make sure consumers are happy. We really have to ask the question, are we building a labor market and an economy that's going to let everyone fulfill that working side of them too?
When we come back from our break, it seems to me Donald Trump sort of tapped into that in ways that the Democrats had not, and many Republicans had not realized. So when we come back from the break, I'd like to turn on that issue and ask the question, what do we need to do to capture those workers and hear their message once again? Merrill Matthews, Institute for Policy Innovation, here on Point of View. We'll be back with Oren Cass in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The millennial generation has a much more positive view of socialism than the previous generation. One survey found that a majority of those aged 18 to 29 had positive feelings about socialism compared to capitalism. There are a number of reasons for their perspective. First, their teachers and textbooks teach about the evils of capitalism. And if that is not enough, the popular media reinforce those ideas. Think of all the movies and TV programs where a capitalist is evil or the greedy corporation is hurting everyone in society. Second, young people want equality. The naive view of socialism seems to provide fairness, equality, and a level playing field. Millennials who feel that life is unfair gravitate to socialism because it seems to provide help for those hurt in a free market society. Third, they haven't done the math. It's easy to argue for free college tuition when you aren't paying for it. It's easy to let the government pay for everything until you realize you are the government. One article that appeared in the Washington Post had this headline: Millennials like socialism until they get jobs. Here are two suggestions about how to get the younger generation to rethink their ideas about socialism. First, millennials don't like other people telling them what to do. In a socialist economy, the leaders are constantly telling you and the economy what to do. Second, a small group of bureaucrats are making most of those economic decisions. Ask them if they've ever tried to get anything done with a committee. Now expand that to the millions of economic decisions that a committee of bureaucrats need to make. History, logic, and personal experience illustrate why socialism doesn't work and is harmful to people in general and the society at large. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From 20th Century Fox and Franklin Entertainment, Breakthrough, starring Chrissy Metz, based on a true story. Breakthrough, rated PG, in theaters Wednesday, April 17th. Point of View, Truth Team 360. Joseph Farah.
Well, I think Point of View is one of the first radio programs to really give us alternative news, if you will, to ferret out those stories that the so-called mainstream media would never bring to people. That is what has always made your program fascinating. It's what has always delivered the audience to you. For people who are really hungry for the real story, for real information, there is no parallel to Point of View.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
And we're back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And on the phone with me today is Oren Cass, a senior fellow with the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research, based there in New York City. And we're talking about his new book, The Once and Future Worker, where Oren raises some new and interesting questions about economics. You know, Oren, the Institute for Policy Innovation, where I work, we're a free market organization. We have long defended free trade, been supporters of that. But there's always a sort of underside. We would argue free trade works for the country. It helps grow the economy, and it helps a lot of people. But there are some people that free trade actually harms in that they end up losing their jobs. It seems like Donald Trump tapped into this and through some resentment that many of us we've just sort of ignored or something, and picked up on that and made that a key issue, and it worked well for him. You highlight that issue as well.
Yeah, trade is, I think, maybe the most fascinating issue to talk about in this consumer versus worker way, because from a consumer's perspective, more free trade is always good, right? Free trade just means you have more choices of where you can buy from. You're going to have access to cheaper stuff, higher quality stuff. And so traditionally, the economic studies we've done have said, look, this is an unqualified good because it's good for consumers. If you ask whether free trade is good for workers, it can be. It's not that it's not good for workers, but it's that the answer is that it depends.
Right, it's nuanced. It's complicated.
Yeah, which is perfect for our modern politics.
Right.
But it's important to emphasize that it depends, and it depends particularly on the question of whether it's balanced. If you have very high levels of trade, so let's say we buy $500 billion of stuff a year from China, and China buys $500 billion a year of stuff from us. That's going to be great for consumers. It's likely to be very good for workers as well, because it's going to mean more of our production is going to be in the areas where we can be most competitive and efficient and where workers can be most productive. So you'd expect that to be good. You'd expect better stuff at cheaper prices and better jobs for workers. The problem comes in if you have a large deficit. If you have the situation we have with China, where we're buying $500 billion of stuff from China, stuff that workers here might otherwise have made, but China only buys $100 billion of stuff from us. So we have essentially allowed an awful lot of Chinese workers to come and compete in our labor market and make stuff for us, but our workers aren't getting a comparable opportunity to make stuff for them. And, from the consumer perspective, economists say that this is the best of all. We're getting all this stuff, and we didn't even have to make anything in return, right? So the traditional economics would actually say not only do trade deficits not matter, we should be celebrating them. But from the perspective of workers, that's just not right. We should celebrate high levels of trade when they're balanced, but we should insist that they be balanced, and we should be very skeptical of a trading system that is producing huge imbalances, and that, we get more cheap stuff, but we're also seeing millions of workers thrown out of their jobs and into an economy that isn't creating other new jobs for them instead.
When you say workers, and it depends upon what industry you work in, because we have a trade deficit in goods, but we tend to have a trade surplus in services, and that's software and other things of that nature. So the free trade model has worked well for let's say the technology industry, people who are in services, they create software, television, movies, and that type of thing. It's that blue collar worker that has been hurt by that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. The one thing I would add is, our deficit in goods is, last I looked, I believe roughly 3 times larger than our surplus in services.
Exactly,
so
yes.
So it's true that it has worked out well on the services side and for especially more highly skilled workers in big cities typically, but in aggregate, and as you said, especially for blue-collar workers in industry, it has not worked out.
So do you feel like Trump tapped into something that the Democrats, who would normally be sort of on the pro blue-collar worker side, did Trump tap into something that they just didn't see coming?
Oh, I think definitely. I think he tapped into something that neither side saw coming. When we were talking about this kind of economic pie idea of we're going to fight about how to grow the pie, we're going to fight about how to redistribute the pie, and he basically said, "I don't care about that. That's not the point." And so, I think it sounded completely different than what was it, 16 other Republican candidates were talking about. Mm-hmm. And then for the Democrats, and you saw this when you got to the general election, it's really important to emphasize that Democrat policies, we could have a debate about whether or not they're good for low-income households as consumers, but Democrats don't have anything to say to blue-collar workers. And, this is one of I think I ended up just making a footnote in my book, but if you go back and you look at Hillary Clinton's speech at the Democratic National Convention, she says her top issue is going to be good jobs at high wages, and then the list of things she ticks off under that agenda, under that heading, none of them have anything to do with good jobs at high wages. And when you look at the Democratic agenda, and frankly, I'm concerned watching them go into 2020 now with all these candidates. And you just say, look, we know you have all these policies to give people more pie, to just big new spending programs to send people more money, but where are the policies that are actually going to shape the economy in a way that's going to be good for the labor market, that's going to, especially for less skilled workers without college degrees, help them earn a living that's going to take care of a family. And that's where they don't have anything.
Has Trump's efforts with the tariffs and his trade wars, is that the approach you would take to address the problem, or would you take a different approach?
It's not the approach I would take. And I think, the best way to understand Trump, in my mind, is that I think he was talking about exactly the right set of problems. And a lot of times that's what politics is about, who is talking about the problems that matter most. Mm-hmm. I think in the solutions he's brought to the table to address those problems, I think he has come up short. And trade is a great example of this, where if you want to actually address a trade imbalance, if you want to say, we want to have balanced trade with China, let's say, tariffs turn out just not to be a very good way to do it. When you kind of go through the economic models and figure out and estimate what's going to happen, especially in the short term, just out of nowhere slapping a bunch of tariffs on other countries doesn't necessarily actually address your trade imbalance. And if you look, actually, America's trade deficit has been growing.
Yes.
Despite everything good that's going on in the economy, we are not closing the trade deficit. If you actually want to take on a trade deficit, I think you have to look a little bit more thoughtfully at what is causing the trade deficit. Why do we have imbalances? And one problem is on the Chinese side with the policies that they pursue that are just, they are not free market policies. They're not fair competition. And so the question is, how can we force them to act differently? How can we make it not in their interest to do that? And then on our side, we have to say also, why is this not an attractive place to be making things? What are the policies that we've pursued, whether it's in education and the kind of training we provide to workers, whether it's in our regulations, our unions? What is it about our system that makes it not a place where you want to make stuff? And so I think those two sides are where we have to focus.
When we come back from the break, I'd like to address the issue of redistribution, which you've already touched on, because that seems to be, at least right now, the Democrats' only answer is to take money away from some people and hand it to others. Our guest today is Oren Cass, author of The Once and Future Worker. He is a senior fellow with the Manhattan Institute in New York. If you want to find out more about Oren, we've got his bio up on the Point of View website. We also have information about the book and other things about him. That's at pointofview.net, pointofview.net. And if you're interested in talking to Oren, the phones are open, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212 to talk to Oren Cass about economies and workers. This is Merrill Matthews. We'll be back with you in just a minute.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And Merrill Matthews, welcome back. I'm sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and on the line with me is Oren Cass, the author of The Once and Future Worker. If you'd like to talk to Oren, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. You know, Oren, we were talking about the redistribution issue. Back in the 90s when Tommy Thompson was pushing welfare reform in Wisconsin, I was more focused on what was on a pilot project in Oregon and Klamath Falls, where they were doing something where it was a project where if you went into the social worker's office, the social worker said, you're going to go to work. That's not an issue. You're either going to go out and find your own job. We're going to help you find a job. We're going to do some make work thing, but you're going to go to work. And it was a very effective program. And I had talked to some of the people. They contacted me sometime after that and said, you had several people who said, I had been on welfare benefits for years. I had sort of lost respect for myself. My children lost respect for me. I didn't think I'd ever be able to hold a job again. They helped me find a job, and I'm doing well now, and I'm making an income, and we're buying a house, and I've got so much more respect for myself just because I'm actually able to work. Yet Democrats' only solution to these things seem to be redistribution of benefits, and not just temporary but long term.
Well, the theory behind the redistribution is that what is missing from the lives of a low-income household is money, and that if that whatever other problems they're facing, if they had more money or more food, and you can either give them money directly or sort of provide for their various needs, that if you took care of those things, then that would solve the problem. And that turns out not to be true. The war on poverty just turned 50. We have wildly expanded the size of our safety net and provide enormous support in the form of various transfer payments to low-income households. And as I mentioned, in material living terms, everybody, including the very bottom, is doing much better than ever. And yet those things don't translate into they certainly don't translate into upward mobility over time. Mm-hmm. They don't help people get back on their feet. They don't help people sort of form stable families and raise kids who are going to be able to do better themselves. And so what they end up being is they're not anti-poverty programs. They're what I would call poverty maintenance programs.
Right.
And we've proved you can, if we spend $1 trillion a year, we can do a lot to help low-income households. But you'd better be ready to spend the next trillion next year. And so, I think we should, as a society, be committed to a solid safety net that makes sure everyone does have access to food, access to shelter, access to medical care. I'm not for getting rid of those things, but I think we should be aware of what they will and won't do. And if we actually want to help people become self-sufficient, to help people form stable families, help them raise kids who are going to achieve more themselves, then the answer can't be, well, let's just keep putting even more money in. Let's prove who's most compassionate by who can write the bigger check. We have to actually be creating a society and an economy that's going to give people a way to support themselves.
I believe you make the point in the books that since the war on poverty began in 1965, the percentage of people who are still below the poverty level has been, it really hasn't changed much after trillions and trillions of dollars.
Exactly, and what some folks will say is no, but you have to look at a different statistic, what they call the consumption poverty line. Mm-hmm. That in consumption terms, we essentially have eliminated poverty because we transfer all these resources to folks every year, and I think that's good to know. we can celebrate that, but it misses the point, which is that in terms of that poverty statistic you just mentioned, which looks at what people are actually earning themselves, we haven't addressed the problem.
Let's go to Catherine in New Mexico. She has a question about Democrats' policies. Catherine, you're on the air.
Okay, so I am just listening, and can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
One thing I don't hear being addressed at all is raising the minimum wage, and that is something Democrats feel very strongly about, and also redistribution of wealth, where those individuals who are making $10 million a year being taxed possibly at a rate of 70%, would be required. That money would be put into things that would help possibly social, programs in the United States. But my main concern is people who make, and it's not me, I'm an educator, but people who make, are getting paid, for example, in the state of Texas, $7.25 an hour. $7.25 an hour. It's pitiful. And so if I don't hear you talking about how if individuals were making more money, they would have more money to spend, and how that would help them to get out of the poverty level.
Okay, Catherine, let's go to Owen and see what he says. Oren?
I agree completely that the low wages that so many jobs pay are a serious problem, and at the heart of a lot of this. The critical question is, what do you do about that? And the problem with trying to solve it by just dramatically increasing the minimum wage is that what you actually do is you make it even less attractive to employ those folks. Folks who are earning $7.25 an hour, it's not that their work is worth $15 or $20 an hour, and the businesses are just getting away with not paying it and pocketing huge profits themselves. If you tell the business, actually, if you have to pay that person $15 an hour, in the short run they might have to, but one thing they're going to do is try to figure out how to build a business that doesn't use that person at all. And so I think if we want to actually help the people in those positions and not just help us feel better about ourselves and maybe get rid of their positions in the process, there's two things we have to do. One thing in the short run is I support what's called a wage subsidy, which is the idea, it's almost like the opposite of a payroll tax. So just like we take payroll taxes out of everybody's paycheck every period, we could create something called a work credit. That's right there in your paycheck if you're a low-wage worker. And you could see that, if you made $7, $8 an hour, the government just put another $4 an hour into your paycheck. And so we just turn that into a $12 an hour job. But the critical thing is, instead of doing that in a way that discourages the employer from offering the position, we've actually done it in a way that encourages the creation of more of those positions. We've said we value this kind of work. We need businesses that hire people for this kind of work. And because we as a society care about it, we're going to kick in part of the money. So I think that's, in the short run, the way to help folks who are at that lowest wage level. And then longer term, if we want wages to be higher, we need people to be more productive. We need to be, from one side, building an education system that realizes that, a lot, maybe even most people aren't going to complete college, but we need to be giving them real skills. And then we need an economy that creates the kinds of jobs where less skilled folks can be really productive. In a lot of cases, that's in industry. It's in sort of big physical occupations, building infrastructure, construction, resource extraction, frankly, exactly the kind of stuff we've pretty much tried to shut down across the country. And we have to embrace it and recognize that it has social value instead of wishing it would go away.
1-800-351-1212, 800-351-1212, if you want to talk to Oren Cass about his new book, The Once and Future Worker. Oren, we only have a little over a minute for this segment, but we do have a program called the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is attempting to subsidize people who are low wage. How is your proposal different than the EITC?
That's a great point. I think the EITC is a good start. It's a step in the direction I'm talking about. The two huge problems with the EITC, one are it almost exclusively goes to families with children. Mm-hmm. If you don't have kids, you get almost nothing. And so really it's almost kind of more of a child tax credit tied to work than it is a true focus on helping those low-wage jobs pay more. The other problem is you get it in a giant refund check at the end of the year, a lot of times maybe more than a year after you did the work. So no one looks at that $7.25 an hour job and thinks, but really it's a $10 an hour job if I just work all year and wait until next February. If we really want to make it clear what these jobs pay, encourage people to take them, help them manage their own finances, we have to find a way to put the money in each check and not just do it as a tax program.
1-800-351-1212 if you want to talk to Oren in our closing minutes. We'll be back with him in just a minute.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
Going through the stations and caught Kirby and a very interesting topic. So just listening to it, and so just by hearing the topic, I can relate to some of those topics. But it has impacted my life a lot. I enjoy listening to the station.
And I've been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now. It's just been such an impact on me because in high school, when I first became aware of the political spectrum and all that, and then the culture wars going on, I was a conservative ideologue, basically, going with whatever conservatives said. But after listening to the show over the years, I've realized that I'm supposed to be for truth. I'm supposed to be a Christian and then a conservative. And I'm supposed to look at all this that's going on around us in today's culture through a biblical lens. And I can't thank y'all enough for that.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
And we're back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, on with Oren Cass, author of The Once and Future Worker. And Oren, let's go to Pete in Texas. He has got a relevant question for us. Pete, you are on the air.
Yes, sir. I'd like for him to explain to us, past 20 years, 30 years, we've had over 30 million illegals into this country, and they're projecting over 1 million more this coming year. How is that going to affect our job security and even our job raises and stuff that we have here?
Oren?
It's an important piece of this puzzle. The best estimates aren't that there are 30 million people in the country illegally. It's more like 10 or 11 million. But he's also correct that the forecast for this year is up to 1 million more, given what's going on at the border right now. And one of the things that has a serious impact on our labor market is obviously who is here working in our labor market. And when you add large numbers, especially of less skilled workers, to the labor market, that is not a good thing for the less skilled workers already here. And whether you're talking about prior generations of immigrants or whoever it is, the more less skilled workers willing to work at lower wages, the less, first of all, the less wage growth you should expect, just because employers don't have to offer as much. But also you'll end up seeing businesses build models that just assume, we have lots of cheap, unskilled labor available, so we don't have to invest in technology, we don't have to invest in training. We're just going to take the approach that uses lots and lots of people at very low wages. And so I think one thing we really have to look at in terms of economic policy is to recognize that, immigration has all sorts of effects on a country, many of them positive, some of them negative, some of them mixed, depends on who you are and how you feel about it. But if one of the real challenges we have in this country is outcomes for less skilled workers, and addressing that is a real priority for us, then we have to find a way to constrain the entry of new unskilled workers, certainly until the unskilled workers who are already here are starting to see better results, I think.
All right, let's go to Jane in Indiana. Jane, you're on the air.
Yes, I was hearing that lady talking about cost of living, and I'm old enough that I've been working all these years. That, as far as I understand, that cost of living never works. What people need is minimum wage doesn't work. What people need is cost of living, because when they do that minimum wage hike, or they go to raise somebody's minimum wage, then everything that you buy, it goes up. Everything costs more when they give somebody a minimum wage raise, and then the companies that supply the products that you're buying, they give you less for what you're buying. They put less ounces of things in food containers and things like that, so you really don't get anywhere with a minimum wage, as far as I understand. Is that correct?
It's certainly partly correct. It depends on what product you're talking about. It depends on how much the minimum wage goes up. But I think the way that you're describing it is exactly the right way to think about the minimum wage, which is to ask, well, who's paying for it? Right? I mean, usually if the government proposes some big new policy and spends a lot of money, it's there in the budget, and we know that taxpayers are paying for it. But a minimum wage increase isn't free. Somebody has to put that extra money into people's paychecks, and so the question is, who's paying for it? And, a lot of folks who argue for big minimum wage increases would like us to believe that, it's the scare quote corporations and the big rich CEOs who are paying for it. But that's not true. I mean, among other things, a lot of the folks employed at very low wages in this country tend to be working for small businesses, for franchises. It actually tends to be the big corporations that already pay higher wages. And so if you raise the minimum wage a whole lot and you're trying to figure out who puts all that money into the paychecks now, it could be the small business owner who might already be barely scraping by himself. It could be other workers at the business who now can't get pay raises or get pay cuts themselves. And it could be customers who just have to pay higher prices. And so I think that's one of the real drawbacks of minimum wage increases is the cost lands in the wrong place. Whereas what I was describing with a wage subsidy, if we say, this is a priority for our society, so we're going to put money into people's paychecks, then we know that is going to come from taxpayers, and we have a system to raise taxes, particularly from folks who are already well off, and that's a much better way of trying to balance things.
Thank you, Jane. And we've got one more here, Ken in Alabama. We're short on time, Ken, so can you make it fast?
I'll try to hurry. People say that they need a $15 minimum wage nowadays to make ends meet. As Peter Schiff at Schiff Gold wrote just the other day, one of the most fundamental problems is that the minimum wage in 1963 or 64 was about $1.25. If you had 5 silver quarters today, that would be at least 1 ounce of silver melt value, and the price of 1 ounce of silver today is $15. So there's your minimum wage. So the problem really is our money's not worth anything today because of inflation. And I'll hang up and listen to your comments.
Thank you, Ken.
Well, it's definitely true that one of the challenges with the minimum wage is that if it doesn't keep up with inflation, then even getting paid the same amount of money every year ends up being worth less over time. I think the other thing that's really important to keep in mind, and this goes to the cost of living question, is that, local economies, local labor markets, local costs of living vary a ton across this country. There are some places that are so high cost now, New York, San Francisco. You can make a case it starts to make sense to have a minimum wage that gets up towards $13, $14, maybe even $15 an hour at some point. But if you go to Alabama, where maybe most workers aren't even earning $15 an hour, trying to set the minimum at $15 an hour, that's where it starts to get crazy. This is, again...
It's a good point, because I wrote a piece for Forbes probably 5 or 6 years ago along the lines of raising a minimum wage is not a good idea, but if you're going to do it, and a lot of states seem to be determined to do it, it's better to do it at the state level, because as you point out, New York's cost of living, they might be able to support a $15 an hour minimum wage, whereas in Alabama, Mississippi, that may very well just break a restaurant owner or something. Well, Oren, thank you so much for joining us. This is a very provocative book and very revealing and interesting. I encourage our readers to take a look at it. The Once and Future Worker. They can find out more information about that on our website, pointofview.net. Thank you, Oren, for joining us.
Oh, this was great. Thanks for having me.
And we're going to be back in a minute now talking about social justice issues. That has become a key issue both now in the culture and in the coming election.
Question, do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about Medishare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With Medishare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with Medishare. And they actually like Medishare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of Medishare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder Medishare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And thank you for joining us for our last hour of Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And with me in studio this hour, Charles Stoffus, a pastor at Denton Bible Church. Charles, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Good to be here, Merrill.
And we've got an interesting discussion on the line now. We've got with us Noah Rothman. Noah is an associate editor at Commentary Magazine. That's a scholarly opinion journal that's been around operating since 1945. Years ago, I used to actually follow it closely. He's also a commentator, contributor at MSNBC and NBC. He graduated from Drew University with a degree in Russian studies and political science, and he has just recently released a new book on the social justice movement called Unjust: Social Justice and the Unmaking of America. Noah Rothman. Noah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, we're looking forward to having you here in Dallas next week. The Institute for Policy Innovation, where I work, is having Noah in for one of our Hatton W. Sumner's Distinguished Lecture Luncheons, and so he'll be here in Dallas to talk about this issue, which has become it's just consuming the country. Let's start off with the issue of social justice. Can you sort of give our listeners a basic explanation of what we're talking about in the social justice movement?
Yeah, so it's kind of like, this is an idea that I think is just generally in the water as a good idea. It's very difficult to define. So people who don't have a whole lot of experience with social justice activists might think this is just a pretty anodyne expression of the American ideal, a way to think about fairness and equality in a just society and righting objective historical wrongs. And there's nothing objectionable about that. Indeed, social justice has a very broad and deep philosophical foundation. It's rooted in Catholic theology, and it's generally a way to think about charity. In the hands of its modern activist class, however, it has become the antithesis of the kind of blind, objective justice we seek in a courtroom. Its activists have embraced ideas that I don't think can be described as anything other than antithetical to the American experiment. Notions like meritocracy is a myth, that agency is denied you because you cannot rise above the station in life into which you were born, that your course in life is in many ways predestined as a result of your accidents of birth, that separatism, racial, demographic, or otherwise, is good explicitly because it prevents social discomfort, and that color blindness in institutions is naive at best and dangerous at worst. The social justice activists on the left believe this, but they might be shocked to learn that white supremacists believe all this too. And that's essentially the thesis of my book, that these two phenomena, these two sides of the same coin, are more similar than they are distinct. They have become racial determinists, and they have embraced ideas that I don't think are compatible with the American ideal, and in many ways, they are incompatible, and that's part of the reason why they are in such constant conflict with what we understand to be the traditional advocates of American civil society.
Noah, this is Charles Stoffus. As I read your book, you indicate this is no small issue. This is not some simple esoteric idea that should be debated at the upper levels of society, but it really reaches down to the average citizen. I mean, in your introduction, you even say that that the political idealism that you defend is imperiled by this obsession with demographic categories of race and sex and ethnicity and even sexual orientation. I think we see this in the news reports and on the university campuses. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How serious, how critical this issue is?
Yeah, well, so social justice in practice has become identity politics in practice. It mimics a governing philosophy and a theory of social organization that, as I said earlier, is incompatible with the American experiment. And it's not like this is being imposed on us from above. It's not as though we have a governing class that is forcing us to embrace these sort of incompatible maxims that would otherwise be resisted by the general public. This is being imposed on us from below. The general public here, who is supportive of these sort of things on both the right and the left, are opposed by their political institutions, who are much more ingrained in and understand American governing institutions. This is an outcry that is being demanded from individuals who think that it is a way to achieve a kind of fairness that has been denied them. And it's very difficult to explain where that comes from, but that makes it much more dangerous, in part because it is so much harder to dispense with. You cannot simply elect another class of leaders who won't pursue this governing policy. This is something that is going to remake our politics from below, and it's swiftly doing so. It's already remade the academy with alarming swiftness. It is reshaping how businesses structure themselves, how interpersonal relationships unfold. It is remaking our politics. It is affecting every aspect of daily life. And that is in part why it is becoming such a pressing phenomenon.
Noah, you mentioned the white supremacist movement is sort of has similarities to the social justice movement, but no political party is claiming the white supremacist movement. The social justice movement is essentially capturing the Democratic Party, it seems.
It is. This book is primarily about the left because social justice is mostly a phenomenon of the left, but it is not exclusively so. Unfortunately, there are responsible elements of both parties are giving much more oxygen to individuals who are tacit, peripheral members of their coalition, in name only, that would be easily jettisoned. But because they personally, I believe, fear alienating any potential member of their coalition, that they have declined to perform the sister soldier moment, as it were. And this applies as much to the left as it does to the right. The president, when he was campaigning for office in 2016, did not do as much as he should have to alienate, distance, and marginalize the members of the so-called alt-right movement that he should have. And this is as much a social justice movement as any on the left. It perceives itself to be victimized, to be beset by forces that are ill-defined and unseen, that have robbed them of their station in life. They are racially conscious. They are deeply victimized. They wallow in a victimization narrative. And as such, they very much mirror the kind of, and they're anti-democratic in whole and in total, and there's a deep philosophical foundation for their belief structures. And they mirror the social justice left, and in many ways, then they should be dismissible. It is very disturbing that they have not been so quickly and easily dismissed.
When we come back after the break, we're going to continue our discussion with Noah Rothman. 1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to talk to him. 1-800-351-1212. And Noah, when we get back, I'd like to bring in this issue of the notion that Democrats feel like they have to go to the social justice movement to sort of get, justification or support from them. If they say something critical of them, it alienates them. And of course, point of view here, we are strong supporters of religious freedom, and increasingly, it seems like if you're going to support religious freedom, you're going to have a head-on collision with the social justice movement. So stay with us, 1-800-351-1212, and we'll be back with Noah Rothman in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The millennial generation has a much more positive view of socialism than the previous generation. One survey found that a majority of those aged 18 to 29 had positive feelings about socialism compared to capitalism. There are a number of reasons for their perspective. First, their teachers and textbooks teach about the evils of capitalism. And if that is not enough, the popular media reinforce those ideas. Think of all the movies and TV programs where a capitalist is evil or the greedy corporation is hurting everyone in society. Second, young people want equality. The naive view of socialism seems to provide fairness, equality, and a level playing field. Millennials who feel that life is unfair gravitate to socialism because it seems to provide help for those hurt in a free market society. Third, they haven't done the math. It's easy to argue for free college tuition when you aren't paying for it. It's easy to let the government pay for everything until you realize you are the government. One article that appeared in the Washington Post had this headline: Millennials like socialism until they get jobs. Here are two suggestions about how to get the younger generation to rethink their ideas about socialism. First, millennials don't like other people telling them what to do. In a socialist economy, the leaders are constantly telling you and the economy what to do. Second, a small group of bureaucrats are making most of those economic decisions. Ask them if they've ever tried to get anything done with a committee. Now expand that to the millions of economic decisions that a committee of bureaucrats need to make. History, logic, and personal experience illustrate why socialism doesn't work and is harmful to people in general and the society at large. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From 20th Century Fox and Franklin Entertainment, Breakthrough, starring Chrissy Metz, based on a true story. Breakthrough, rated PG, in theaters Wednesday, April 17th. Point of View, Truth Team 360.
Hi, this is Lee Strobel, author of The Case for Christ. You know, one of the best ways that we can grow in our ability to understand why we believe what we believe is to get an ongoing dose of God's truth into our lives. And one of the best ways of all to do that, Kirby Anderson does a tremendous job of giving us a regular diet of evidence, of logic, of God's truth from His Word, so that we can continue to do what 1 Peter 3:15 tells us, to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks us to give the reason for the hope that we have, and to do it gently and with respect. So I am a huge fan of Kirby. I'm a huge fan of Point of View. I know that you probably are as well. That's why you're listening, and I hope you'll get behind them, support them, so that this ministry can continue on into the future and flourish even more next year than this year.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
And we're back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, and in the studio with me, Charles Stolfus, a pastor at Denton Bible Church. And on the line is Noah Rothman, author of Unjust, Social Justice and the Unmaking of America. Noah, going back to the 1960s, late 50s, early 60s, you had the civil rights movement. It was sort of easy to get your head around what was going on here, the discrimination against, primarily we were talking about black Americans. Hispanics were also in there too, but it was primarily against black Americans in that movement. But when you're talking about the social justice movement, you've got issues of gender, you've got race, you've got income, you've got sexual orientation, you've got religion, as in some of the Muslims and so forth. It's hard to get your arms around just what what the issue is here, because so many of them have different issues, and they're just saying you have to accept us and embrace us, but there's several different things going on there.
Well, I think insofar as you have one overarching issue there, it is anti-discrimination and equality understood as the common human family. That was the argument that was made in the civil rights movement, and that is why it was successful, because it was an appeal to common human aspiration. And the notion, by the way, that the civil rights era movement leaders were living up to the American ideal far better than their opponents were. They appealed to our common Americanness, our understanding of what egalitarian governments should be, was what triumphed, because it understood that there was the fundamental idea in the Declaration that all men are created equal cannot be improved upon. There's no going forward from there. There's only going backwards. And that's in part why this current movement, this current iteration of the social justice movement is, I think, failing, because it does not embrace common humanity. It embraced distinction and difference, and the notion that we should all be treated in distinct ways resulting from our accidents of birth. It advocates for separate tracks and for perceiving individuals not as individuals, but as members of their collective tribe, who are to be treated as such. It is in part where this idea of inherent privilege comes from, or its alternative, which is inherent abuse, essentially suffered not by individuals but by collective groups, of which you may not even be aware of, because you suffer from it in a state of ignorance. It is not something that you've perhaps experienced in your personal life, but you experience it as part of a collective, as part of your history. It is bequeathed unto you by birth, and you have to be educated about it in order to fully understand it and experience it as such. So it's part of an educational paradigm. And so this book doesn't argue that discrimination doesn't exist. It most certainly does. The argument is that the prescriptions that are applied by this particular movement are going to fail on their own merits, in part because they have abandoned the idea that has animated Americans for the past 240 years, which is blind equalitarian to justice before law and before God, and seeing individuals as individuals, not as members of their collective tribes.
Noah, I think for many, the whole idea of social justice implies a pursuit of justice, and yet many of the expressions of this movement seem to be so unjust and a preoccupation with differences, not a call for equality so much, but really preference for a particular demographic category. It seems really the antithesis of reason and logic and fairness. What explains that kind of disconnect?
So this is born, the social justice movement, as we were talking about earlier, is born out of the 19th century in the Catholic Church, which was much more, again, about a way of thinking about charity. It was an alternative to the secular Protestant Enlightenment, which the Catholic experience had a much more different experience with in France as opposed to England and Scotland. The Enlightenment was a much more dangerous and violent experience for the Catholic Church in France. And so they created an alternative which evolved in the late 1960s, early 1970s in the hands of philosopher John Rawls into a much more paradigmatic idea about how to organize society. So he advocated the idea of social justice as a way to think about justice as like a finite commodity that needed to be distributed by an enlightened distributor. And in order to do that justly, he created this theoretical construct he called the veil of ignorance. So you operate behind this blind spot. So the distributor could not satisfy their own biases, of which they may not even be conscious. The modern social justice movement has no use for the veil of ignorance. It is a morally obtuse idea. How can you have a just distribution if you do not know who the objects of your distribution are going to be? Who are the oppressed? Who are their oppressors? Who needs to be lifted up? And who deserves a comeuppance? That is the sort of idea that the modern social justice movement has embraced. It is retributive in its philosophy. It's no longer about lifting people up who may deserve something based on their own individual mitigating circumstances. It is about tamping people down who belong to the wrong class, tribe, or group. And that is how you dehumanize somebody. And once you dehumanize somebody, you can do a lot of different things to them that are very distasteful. This is where the social justice movement is today.
1-800-351-1212 if you want to talk to Noah. And we have Kat on the line from New Hampshire. Kat, you're on the line.
Hi, thank you. I had a comment, and I'm curious as to what your response might be to this comment. I'm a Christian, and I have, for the longest time, watched, what's going on with this social justice movement that everyone's talking about. But I also wanted to ask, since this country was founded, I really wonder if what is happening with this social justice that's going on right now and what they're doing, if anybody's really taking a look at the fact that maybe these people learned from watching what had happened from the founding of this country to people like the Native Americans and like the slaves. Now, this is not to place blame. This is to impart understanding. As far as these people and the social justice movement that's going on, some of the tramping down and saying we have to take from the ones who have and give to the have-nots. When this country was first founded, there was a lot of Native Americans who had their lands taken unjustly through the legal system that purported to be a just and civilized means of resolving land issues. These Native Americans had their lands taken. You add to that the slavery that was going on, and then you add to that the poor tenant farmers and the people who were in poverty back then, who were not black or not slaves, but they were still could be indentured servants. When you have that kind of thing going on and that kind of justice in society and backed by law going on and that kind of founding of a country, how can one not expect that to backlash and whip back in the future from the masses of people who have become aware of this? How can people not see that that social justice movement learned from the founders and from the people who did this way back in the beginning of the founding of this country? And
okay, Kat, let's get an answer from her. I'm going to put her on hold because of the background noise. Noah.
Very fair comment and question, and I think this stems, her comment comes from a position of fundamental moral righteousness, and it is one that is shared by just about every social justice activist. Social justice stems from a very noble place, a fundamentally American place. It's a pursuit of fairness and equality, and understanding the historical injustices that she addressed and trying to correct for them. What she's talking about is reparative justice, which is a little different but fundamentally distinct from retributive justice. There is a very big difference between those two things. Reparative justice seeks to identify these individuals who have been wronged and provide them with restitution for their individual identified genuine grievances. Retributive justice is something far different. Retributive justice seeks punishment for collectives, classes who are perceived to have benefited from the conditions that she identifies. There are plenty of societies that have embarked on those projects, and those societies are no better off for that effort. That is the kind of effort that creates indemnities and grievances that span generations and conflicts that last for generations far over. We do not want to go down that course.
1-800-351-1212, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And we're back. I'm Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. With me in studio, Charles Stoffus, a pastor at Denton Bible Church, and we have on the line Noah Rothman, who is the author of Unjust, Social Justice, and the Unmaking of America. Noah is an associate editor with Commentary Magazine and a contributor at NBC and MSNBC. And Noah, incidentally, if you want to know more about Noah or his book, you can go to pointofview.net. That is all available on our website. You can find out about Noah, his biographies there, information about the book, and what he's doing. And so we encourage you to go there and do that. 1-800-351-1212 if you want to talk to Noah, 1-800-351-1212. Noah, as I mentioned in the last segment, Point of View, we are very interested in the issue of religious freedom, but it seems like the social justice movement may be running head on into the religious freedom aspect. If I'm a baker and I have a store and I can let anybody come in, anybody's welcome to come in and buy my products and so forth. But if you want me to go and make something that I disagree with religiously, I have a religious objection to that, then we're finding that being pushed in the courts. Can a social justice movement and religious freedom coexist?
I think they can. I'm hopeful for that. So I'm a little more sanguine about those experiments in the courts. Whenever you have an anti-discrimination law, or any law, frankly, they are always challenged in the courts and on any number of grounds, and so often those suits are frivolous. But the effort is to establish the parameters around which those laws apply, and that is part of how a free society operates. And so far, I think we've been genuinely heartened by the extent to which those laws have survived challenges in the court's anti-discrimination laws, even to the extent that they are particularly abusive. The individual you're talking about in this court case is a Colorado baker who's repeatedly targeted by what I believe to be frivolous lawsuits, attempts to ruin him particularly. He can find legal redress because he is a particular target of these frivolous suits. But I think that social justice, being a religious concept itself, is not fundamentally at odds with religion. It is at odds with its current practitioners, many of whom are secular, liberal, and progressive, and generally hostile towards religion. But social justice has become, in and of itself, in its practice, sort of a secular religion itself. It's an alternative to religion. Mm-hmm. The way in its practitioners adhere to its dogmas mimic religiosity, and it's not a figment of your imagination. This religiosity is a vestigial trait of its religious origins, and a society that is increasingly divorced from the church needs to find something to fill that void. And for the practitioners of social justice, it has become this pseudo-religious civic philosophy that mimics religiosity in its practice.
I know many expressions of the social justice movement, especially on campus, seem to be so angry. The angry shutting down of conversation on campus, discussions of things, many examples of that on especially some of the elite universities on the East Coast. I mean, what explains the anger of this movement?
Well, frankly, it's success, if you want to know the truth. They are victims of their own success, in part because America has become objectively a more just society over the course of the last 50 years. One of the chapters in my book is called Truths and Transgressions, and it focuses on the things that are objectively defensible, objectively observable, but to say out loud will engender a response that is divorced from anything that resembles rationality. It is an enraged response because it is a truth that is unacceptable among them, that race relations in this country have improved markedly over the course of the last 50 years. That seems difficult to argue against, particularly when we're talking about a period in which we were deploying the 101st Airborne on American soil to desegregate schools, and today when we have just come out of the last two-term African-American president. It seems hard to argue against that, but that is the sort of notion that social justice activists will rail against with violent fury because it is such a threat to the worldview around which they've organized their lives. The notion that there has been improvement in something like that cuts at the heart of their very understanding of their raison d'etre, the reason why they have organized their lives around this philosophy, and so it is resisted with incredible passion. It's only one of several of these truths, but I think that's where you're getting at, in part because of the capacity of this country to reinvent itself and to strive towards equality effectively is one of their biggest frustrations. And when I talk about the American ideal on campuses, the notion that the American ideal is the pursuit of truth and equality, and that they get very frustrated by that because all they know of the American ideal is that it's failed. We have only failed to achieve it. And if that's all you know of it, then why would you think it's worth preserving? But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the word ideal. An ideal is aspirational. You may never achieve it. The operative word in the phrase more perfect union is not perfect, but more. You do not have license to abandon the project simply because you have not realized it to your satisfaction. You will never realize it, but that does not give you license to stop trying.
Let's go to Thomas in California, who has a question about something that's been popping up here at Al Sharpton's recent meeting, reparations. Thomas, you're on the line.
Yeah, my understanding back in the 80s, the ACLU and the NAACP had taken it into the U.S. Supreme Court and had to try to sue the federal government for reparations of the ancestors of the black people. And the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled it wasn't a federal issue. They would have to sue the state of Alabama or Birmingham where their ancestor was enslaved. And it was thrown out of court. That was my understanding back in the 80s. And I know not only Al Sharpton, but the social justice people have been banging the drum on that too.
Noah, what are your thoughts on the reparations issue?
Yeah, well, it could be addressed in law on the federal level. It simply has not been. I don't suspect that's going to happen, but there's a growing momentum towards it, including among even some conservatives. I don't particularly take an issue on that. I don't write about this in my book. I don't think it's the end of the world if it were to be pursued, nor do I think it would affect any particular change. My concern is that everybody will wake up the next day after this one-time financial payment, one-time transfer of wealth, and think that something has changed when nothing has. Systemic racial issues will persist. Mm-hmm. African Americans who perceive that to be a significant problem in the country will still perceive it to be a problem. And the Caucasian Americans, white Americans who think they will have purchased something with their tax dollars will find out that they didn't buy a single thing, and that people will believe that racism in this country has been solved by this one-time wealth transfer when nothing has changed. And everybody will be very frustrated by that reality. And in that sentiment lie the seeds for a backlash that, in my view, has all the potential to make race relations in this country worse. Yes. So it could actually end up being a problem more than it solves anything.
Do you think it would be a one-time settlement, or would it be something that they would want to extend over a period of time?
I have no idea. I honestly don't think this is going to be manifest in legislation anytime soon. But envisioning it as a one-time wealth transfer or even a series of tranches, I just don't think it's going to have the intended effect.
But I noticed at Al Sharpton's meeting, Beto O'Rourke and a number of other people were asked about that, and I remember Beto O'Rourke saying if that bill came to him as president, he would sign it. So that may very well end up being something in the Democratic platform for 2020.
It may be, but the bill has to get to his desk before he can sign it. I have trouble envisioning the Congress that would pass it.
Well, interestingly, I just saw a note today that from the Daily Caller that apparently the House moved a legislation encouraging states to or schools to if a male who identifies as a female wants to participate in female sports, that they should that the school should allow them. And as I read the Daily Caller piece, every Democrat except for one signed on to that, and included 2 Republicans.
Yeah, Martina Navratilova, who's a tennis player, recently got in a lot of hot water when she came out against the participation of biological males in female sports because it was inherently unfair. And unjust was the term that she used. And she got in a ton of hot water over this because it was fundamentally an attack on the social justice dogmas of the modern left, and she eventually retracted essentially her criticism.
Yes.
And I frankly don't think she should have.
I agree. 1-800-351-1212 if you want to talk with Noah Rothman in our closing minutes. 1-800-351-1212, and we'll be back.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
I'm actually on my way to work, and I listen to you guys' program every day on the way to work. It just gives me a lot to think about.
Thank you. First of all, let me say I listen to y'all's show every day as much as I'm able, and I really appreciate the topics and conversation that y'all bring to the fore.
I always wanted to give because I thought that Point of View really brings a lot of things in out here in the open that you don't hear anywhere else.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
And Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and with me in the studio, Charles Stoffus, a pastor at Denton Bible Church, and on the line with us, Noah Rothman, who is the author of a new book, Unjust, Social Justice, and the Unmaking of America. And Charles, when I go through his book, there's a lot of words here that we haven't had to use in the past that are now coming up. Intersectionality is one. What is this?
Yes, I would love to hear from Mr. Rothman about this intersectionality as it relates to the idea of social justice. It seems, as you explain it, to help us understand why it is, for instance, the Kavanaugh hearing turned out like it did, with arguments by supposedly rational senators to say to others in a category of being an old white man to be quiet and let someone else speak, or we need to believe someone just because she happens to be a woman. Can you explain the idea of intersectionality as it relates to social justice?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is integral to understanding modern social justice activism. So intersectionality as an academic theory is perfectly fine, valid as a thought experiment. It was posited and formalized by Williams Crenshaw, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and it stipulates essentially that people are possessed of disparate traits when they are born, some of which are discriminated against more than others. So, as by way of example, a white man will experience less discrimination than a black man, and a black woman will experience more discrimination than a black man because she is both a woman and black. It goes on from there. You can understand that a disabled Native American, would experience vastly more discrimination than someone else. And as a thought experiment, this is, again, valuable. As a means of political organization, however, it is extremely pernicious. One of the reasons why it applies so much to the Kavanaugh hearings is because there was such a dearth of information involving the actual accusations against the Supreme Court justice nominee that people had to interrogate their own personal experiences in order to litigate the questions about his conduct as a teenager. And in so doing, they appealed to what we would otherwise call stereotypes. They judged him by his accidents of birth, his socioeconomic status, his gender, and his race. The perfect example of how intersectionality works in practice is the Women's March. The Women's March was a movement that was extremely integral to the Democratic Party's organizational structure in the wake of Donald Trump's election. It was a sympathetic movement. It was very important and powerful. It resulted in these marches across the country, and it was embraced by the Democratic Party. But its leaders adhered to intersectionality to a degree that destroyed the movement. Its members, some of whom possessed traits that were perceived to advance white supremacy, in the words of Tamika Mallory, like their white Jewish members, couldn't be considered allies because they were white, even if they believed everything that they believed in, that they all shared these beliefs. And so they were abandoned and jettisoned by the movement. Similarly, the Women's March embraced people with no political constituency, but who were nevertheless part of the movement because of their accidents of birth. People like Assata Shakur, who's a convicted cop killer living in Cuba as a fugitive from justice, or the minister Louis Farrakhan, who's an overt anti-Semite. It would have cost the movement nothing to abandon these people, to castigate them and say they do not represent us. But to abandon them in the eyes of intersectionality theory would have to legitimize the prejudices against which they claim to strive. And so they counted them members of their movement, and they became so embarrassing to the Democratic Party that they had to simply abandon them. It turned out that that intersectionality, rather than being an empowering philosophy, robbed the Women's March of its power, of its political influence. And that's the argument that I make in this book, is that even if you're attracted to these ideas and that you think they're valid and valuable in some way, they're making your life harder. They're making you a less attractive member of a political coalition and making the things you want to achieve less likely to be achieved. It's a pragmatic argument, and I hope it carries the day.
Well, Noah, Charles had mentioned the anger that we see from them, but also the violence. This has been something we haven't seen in the country for a long time, is that you have, it's not just I disagree, you have the Antifa movement, you have responses at colleges as maybe conservative people are coming there to talk, somebody they disagree with. It has become a very violent movement also.
Yeah, unfortunately, very much. And this is, again, on the right and the left. These are two sides of the same coin, and the narcissism of small differences has them at each other's throats. You know, we all watched as violent, racially conscious social justice activists on the right and the left clashed in Charlottesville, and we wondered how we got here. But if we were cognizant of these trends, we would have seen how we got here. They were very much present for years before, precisely a year before almost to the day. In Sacramento, California, you had a very similar situation in which a permit demonstration of white nationalists clashed with the precursor to what became Antifa, called By Any Means Necessary, all of whom, literally communists and fascists clashing in the street, knifing each other in the streets. It was America's Weimar moment. And it wasn't the first time this has happened, and unfortunately probably not the last. And unless we address this head on and talk about what is happening to this country, it's only going to get worse.
Take 30 seconds to say how we might address it.
Well, America's two major political parties have models to adhere to if they wanted to. Again, I make a political pragmatic argument that says these ideas, maybe you believe some of them, maybe you think they're valid, but they are making your life more difficult. And the same thing has occurred in the past to both Republicans and Democrats. In the late 1960s, or late 1950s, early 1960s, the Republican Party and the conservative movement expelled from its ranks the Bircher movement, and they did so in a very pragmatic fashion by identifying not people who need to be purged, but ideas that need to be stigmatized and isolated. Similarly, the Democratic Party in the late 1940s isolated and stigmatized and marginalized the communists within the organized labor movement because they were making them a less attractive political party to appeal to 50+1 at the polls. These are the arguments that I make in this book, and hopefully, if you're with me through all those chapters and you think this is a problem worth addressing, that is how I prescribe addressing it.
Well, good. Thank you. Yes, I was with you through the chapters. Unjust, Social Justice, and the Unmaking of America, Noah Rothman's new book. He takes on a very difficult subject and does a good job of hitting over a range of different topics, both historically and some of the current things that we're seeing. So, Noah, thank you so much. It looks like I'm going to see you probably next Tuesday here in Dallas, and we look forward to that.
Me too. I can't wait. I'm very excited. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Charles, he's taken a difficult subject and tried to explain this. And, you and I deal with these kinds of things. It is a difficult subject trying to get your arms around all the various aspects of this.
Yeah, absolutely. For the last several years, I've seen things that have been developing on campuses, the violence, the irrationality of some of these arguments here, and
bizarreness in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely. The illogic of it, and I'm just trying to get my mind around what would explain all that, and he does a wonderful job of explaining many of the causes of this and some of the philosophical roots of this. And he contrasts, I think, interestingly enough, he contrasts the strategy which will ultimately be unsuccessful in the modern social justice movement with the success of the civil rights movement of the 60s, a nonviolent effort to bring about significant societal change.
Well, Charles Stoffus, Denton Bible Church, thank you for joining me. And you can go to Point of View, find out more about Noah Rothman, and we will be back tomorrow. Thank you for joining us.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.